Hello, everyone in the US, Israel, Palestine, and other places in the world. I am Lenny Grob, the Vice President of Partners for Progressive Israel, and welcome to this latest installment of Conversations with Israel and Palestine, a series of informational webinars that bring voices from Israel and Palestine to an American and international audience, providing an important link between progressives in the Middle East and those outside. Before I hand it over to today's discussion moderator, let me note that Partners for Progressive Israel is an American not-for-profit organization dedicated to the achievement of a durable and just peace between Israel and its neighbors, and believes in the need to ensure civil rights, equality, and social justice for all of Israel's inhabitants. Partners seeks to deepen Americans' understanding of Israel's complexities so that they can better advocate for a progressive Israeli future. One of the ways Partners has done this is through its Israel Symposium. For the past 30 years, we've led groups on progressive political trips, study tours to Israel and Palestine. This year, for the first time, we will be leading the trip virtually, beginning a week from Sunday, August the 16th. On our first day, we'll visit the Knesset to meet with members of Knesset from Meretz and the Joint List. And during a second session that same day, we'll be meeting with representatives from Likud, Blue and White, and Labor. To learn more about the Israel Symposium, we encourage you to do so. Please visit our website at progressiveisrael.org. If any of you, since we have an overflow on Zoom, if any of you also have Facebook and would like to switch, on the chat box, the address will be posted. Now let me introduce our moderator. Khaled Elgindy is Director of the Program on Palestine and Palestinian-Israeli Affairs at the Middle East Institute, and an adjunct instructor in Arab Studies at Georgetown University. He's the author of the new book, Blind Spot, America and the Palestinians from Balfour to Trump, published by Brookings Institute Press in April of last year. Elgindy previously served as a resident scholar in the foreign policy program at the Brookings Institution from 2010 to through 2018. Prior to arriving at Brookings, he served as an advisor to the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah on permanent status negotiations with Israel for 2004 to 2009, and was a key participant in the Annapolis negotiations of 2007-2008. Elgindy has held a number of political and policy-related positions in Washington, both inside and outside of government, and has also held positions at the Arab American Institute and the National Democratic Institute. Take it away, Khaled.
Thank you, Lenny, and thank you all for joining us today on what I expect will be a fascinating conversation. As Lenny said, I'll be moderating the discussion today. I'll begin with a few questions of my own for our panelists, and about halfway through, hopefully in the second 30 minutes or so, we'll move toward to take questions from the audience, and I can see many of you are already posting your questions. If you want to pose a question, please do so using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'll field those questions for our panelists. Please note that all of your mics are muted to avoid background noise, and so only the mics of the panelists and myself and our introducers will be working. So now let me quickly introduce our panelists and then get into our discussion. Limor Yehuda is a legal scholar, currently a fellow at the Minerva Center for Human Rights at the Faculty of Law at Tel Aviv University. She has a PhD in law from the Hebrew University, has previously clerked at the Israeli Supreme Court for Chief Justice Aharon Barak, and directed the Department for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories at the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, ACRI. She's one of the founders of A Land for All, and we're going to hear more about that. 2 states, 1 homeland. Limor's doctoral dissertation titled Collective Equality, Rethinking Human Rights and Democratic Legitimacy in the Resolution of Ethno-National Conflicts examines the use of special constitutional arrangements, such as power-sharing mechanisms within peace agreements. The dissertation develops the concept of collective equality, which I will be asking Limor to unpack for us, as a principle for peacemaking in ethno-national and group conflicts. We're also very pleased to have Ameer Fakhoury, who is a lawyer, political activist, and the director of the School for Peace Research Center in Nevi Shalom, Wahat al-Salam, Israel's only intentional Arab-Jewish village committed to a genuine peace and bilingual and multicultural equality. He is also a central member of the pro-Confederation, A Land for Peace, A Land for All, Land for Peace is what we're moving away from, A Land for All movement, and has represented the movement before the European Parliament. Ameer is currently a doctoral candidate in political sociology at the University of Haifa, where he focuses on the political sociology of ethnic and national groups. He earned his law degree from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He is a Palestinian citizen of Israel, born and raised in the city of Akka, or Akko, which is actually one of my favorite places in the country. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna ask maybe Limor, if you could start us off. Tell us about the Land for All movement, what it is, how it was formed, and what are its political objectives, and why you're involved in it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Khaled, for your introduction, and thank you for partners for this event, and Lenny for opening and inviting. I'm really happy and thankful for the opportunity to participate. So I'll start with some basic, as you suggest, basic introduction to the movement. A Land for All is a joint Israeli-Palestinian movement that's at work already for around 8 years. Its main thing is to offer a new paradigm for Israeli peace, for Israeli-Palestinian peace, called the vision that we developed is called 2 states, 1 homeland, which is based on a union or a confederation between 2 sovereign democratic states, Israel and Palestine, along the 67 borders, the Green Line. So we say that we offer a shift or of paradigm because our vision involves a different mindset regarding how we think and talk about peace in our land. So while we're talking about 2 states, as all of us were talking for the last decades, we do think that we offer something that is completely new. And this is because 2 main points, at least as I understand it. When we talk about peace, we talk about equality and partnership instead of isolation and separation. And we envisage freedom of movement across the entire land instead of high concrete walls to divide it. Our movement is found on the fundamental recognition that we are 2 peoples that inhabit the land. None of us is going anywhere. And this is the same land that some of us call Palestine and some of us call the land of Israel. And we can see it on the maps that we know from schools, from Jewish Israeli schools and from Palestinian schools. This is closely, but very much the same map exactly. So if we are grounded in this recognition that both Palestinians and Jews belong to this land and see it as their homeland, and that the land is big enough to serve as a place of refuge and as a place for national self-determination for both people, all this brings us to 3 principles. So the first is independence. So usually independence is imagined as an isolated thing, like not to be controlled by anyone or to be intervened, but we envisaged independence, national self-determination as interdependence. It means that Israel and Palestine will be two independent, sovereign, and democratic states with full control over the territory, with border along the Green Line, but they're not going to be isolated. It doesn't mean that, so interdependency is one important element. Mutual respect and recognition is a second principle. In the Northern Ireland Peace Agreement, they use the term parity of esteem, which I really love. It means that the two peoples and acknowledge and recognize and grant respect to the two national traditions. It includes mutual respect, also to the connection of the two people to the whole land. The third principle is partnership. Again, in difference from how the traditional two-state solution is envisioned. And the two states will establish a shared superstructure of joint institutions operating on the basis of equality and agreed upon by the two states. Those institutions, I don't need to mention them, and it's not something that we fully developed. It's the principle. The principle is that we need to have joint institutions also for the things that the two states and the two people would like to share, and they will be able to manage separately if things that they would not want to share. So just examples, security, some of the aspects of security of the borders along the whole territory will need to be jointly managed. There will be civil and socioeconomic rights, some of them that will need to be managed together, economic aspects, environmental aspects, and so forth. But the main thing is that the joint institutions give a place for the two states and for the two people to negotiate as equals, which is fundamental to promoting peace and the reality of equality in the region. So just a few words about the creation of the movement. As I said before, it was around 8 years ago. It started as meetings of Palestinians and Israelis at Bejala. It was led by Meron Rappaport and Auni El-Mashni, and some of us joined already then. Some of us means, some I will mention, Munir Abushi, Muhammad Beiruti, Eliaz Cohen, Oren Iftachel, and myself. And from the beginning, it was understood that the classic two-state solution is either dead or is on the verge, and basically that has become irrelevant. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, that a one-state solution, while many Palestinians, even some of the Palestinians that joined the movement, our movement, see as the preferred solution for the conflict, we estimate that this is not a political solution. It's not something that is a viable solution that will be able to be delivered in the foreseeable future. We also agreed that the solution we are aiming, as I said, is profoundly different, offering a new path for peace, and not thinking about peace as divorce, but thinking about peace as a relationship between the two peoples. So it took us many meetings and many hours of writing and rewriting until we ended up with a 3-page document with the 11 principles, which you can find on our website. And we structured the movement as we envisioned the political structure of this place. So we are 2 branches of the movement, an Israeli one and a Palestinian one. We work towards our respective constituencies. So I'm part of the Israeli branch, and we are working towards the Israeli public. But we work and meet routinely and discuss the issues routinely together. So our goal, we have one major goal, and this is to shift the paradigm of how people are looking, thinking, imagining peace in this land. I think it's a very big and challenging goal, and I think that just recently, with Peter Beinart's article, we definitely starting to feel the waves of change. At least we see it in the discussion and interest in the subject again. So I'll stop here, and we'll be happy to give more.
Yeah, great. Thanks for getting us started, Limor. I wanted to ask Ameer, maybe you could break down for us, what is Confederation? What do we mean when we say that word? I know a lot of people are imagining, different things. We can wrap our brains around clear partition. You have one state here, we have another state there, or one state. But Confederation is sort of somewhere in between one state and two states, and where you draw the line really depends. What does Confederation mean to you, and what does it offer that traditional either partition, two states, or one state have so far failed to offer?
Thank you. I can answer this while dividing the answer into two terms. One is the aspect of the ethos underlying the Confederation, and one is in what concerns the construction or underlying the Confederation. Confederation as an institution, as a political construction, means two sovereign states coming together in a shared agreement of building shared institutions. So you have the both elements of alone and together, elements of independence, sovereign states, separate states, but both are under the same overall political construction, which you can name confederation, but again you can name it also a union. So we have two levels of political constructions, but I really want to emphasize the ethos underlying the confederation. For 100 years we have tried to educate both people how not to live with each other, not how to share this land, and how to manage and live with each other. And if we acknowledge that both people, both the Israeli Jews and our Palestinians, are already mixed. You have almost 2 million Palestinians in the Green Line, citizens like myself, citizens of Israel. So the political imagination seeking separations becomes quite dangerous, because if you invest in educating and Israeli Jews to separate, to divorce from Palestinians, what does it mean in what concerns Palestinians that they're co-citizens? So I think it is time that we leave, we forsake this this quite dangerous thought that we can separate two nations. Instead, we have to tell them that the only thing that can bring you together is your affinity to this shared homeland, and you have to expand your political imagination to accept this homeland as one unit, economically, politically, emotionally. It's already one unit, but we have to change the terms of living in this area. It is already mixed by population. It is, I can move already in Palestine. I can have breakfast in Akka or Haifa and have dinner in Ramallah. So it's already one union, but we have to change the terms. We have to democratize the space and try start to educate once and for all. Try to educate both people. You have to learn to live with each other, not to divorce each other, not to think that you can stop seeing Palestine. Israeli Jews have to understand they cannot. There will not be a day that they stop seeing Palestinians here, and Palestinians have to understand that Israeli Jews are their neighbors, and they have say. If we cultivate this ethos, and for me it is quite amazing that after 100 there's no anchored, well-established ethos that we can teach our boys and girls that there isn't another nation here, and we have to cultivate the national skills, the political skills that will enable us to live with each other. Then we will translate it to political institution, preferably to confederation, to a union that will translate this emotion and hopefully will be a recipe for a just and durable peace.
Thank you, Ameer. I think what is most striking about this model or this concept, which is really a hybrid between two states and one state, is the sea change that is required at a psychological level. Limor, you talked about a non-separation, that one of the key principles is a realization that these are two groups that are intimately bound up in one another, but demographically, but also economically and in many other ways, certainly geographically. And that, sort of unscrambling the egg is basically impossible. But so much of Israeli thinking in particular has been about separation, with or without, frankly, a peace process, right? The barrier that was built, the wall in the West Bank, it's a separation barrier. The mindset in Israel since the early 2000s has been, we need to separate from them, with or without a peace deal.
Right.
So how do we get there? How do we convince, how do you convince the overwhelming majority of Israelis that not only are you stuck with Palestinians, but you have to cooperate with them and as equals? And what incentive do they have to do that when they can have all of the land and separation from Palestinians at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, those are the challenges that we definitely face. So how do we do that? First of all, challenges all nations in beginning are facing, right? And Jews, when faced enormous challenges, and it was not stopping them from imagining that it's possible. So we say, and I think the most powerful thing that convinced me that it's possible is the first meeting that I joined the movement. We were 30 people around, Palestinians and Israelis, as I said, in Beinart 8 years ago. And once all of us said, yes, this is the future that we want, this is the future that we believe in, that made it possible, that made it real. So I think it's up to us to decide. Us, I mean, it's us around this meeting, and it's us around the circles that we meet, and it's expanding circles of people that believe that this is the more dignified, the more desirable future, and the way that they want to live here. Because Israel at the moment is able to control the whole land. This is the reality of the last 50 years. We cannot deny it. And the last 50 years, what we see is that Israel pushing for more and more Jewish domination of the entire land and to establish that. So until now, the peace movement, its main focus was to stop these things, to stop settlements as a major activity, right? For me, our idea changed the issue. We're not anymore stopping someone else's deeds. This is not the main focus, but what we are aiming at is equality within the entire land. It aims for a future that we can build. And I think this first, it inspires people. And so I don't think it will be easy, and Israeli Jews will not give up on their privileges very easily. But I think there are things that we can do. First of all, we should stop thinking about peace now. We need to think about peace as a long process of building and growing up. And we can learn from other places, and we can even learn from the experience that Israel is having within Israel with regard to Arab citizens of Israel. And what happened in the last 20 years, for example, I think made dramatic changes, even if it was without intentions of the government, that actually was part of those developments. So we can promote economic development. We can promote many things that even the right wing in Israel will not object. And even if at the earlier stages, it will not bring us to the political equality that we believe is inherent part of peace. Eventually it will go there, and we need to be convinced, and we need to work towards that this is the only thing. It will come, and it will come eventually. My hope is that it will come with less violence than with more, and this is why we are working now to make that possible, that this shift towards more equality, towards equality, will be without violence.
I have lots of questions for you. Just a quick, before I want to ask Ameer a question, but before doing that, Limor, if you could just a quick follow-up. Why not pursue, instead of collective equality, why not simply go for broke and say we want total individual equality? And in one state, why is it necessary to have this additional, very complicated step of negotiating how the terms of the partnership?
Yeah. Okay. So why don't go to one state, one man, one vote, like in South Africa? Yeah. As I said, so also with regard to the one-state solution, there are two main possibilities that are out there. One is, like you just said, a unitary state with one man, one vote. I would say it's unrealistic in our area. We have two people very attached to their national identity. None of them, and I can speak with regard to Israeli Jews, none of them are going to give it up. So if we're talking about being realistically, politically, this is a non-realistic, or it's an apolitical idea. This is one. With regard to the ones, so in a way, we cannot go, we are not over, in this region of the world, we are not over the national phase. We are not a post-national place. And I don't see, so our political landscape is nationalistic, very deeply so. And even if we don't feel very well with that as progressives, right? Some of us at least, I think we need to recognize that this is how it is here. And that if we want to move beyond that, we need to recognize it, to embrace it, and to give it the boundaries that can peacefully, those two nations can peacefully coexist and be in partnership.
Thank you, Limor.
For my short answer.
No, that was very good. Ameer, I wanted to ask you to break things down a little bit for us even further. I think one of the most striking things about this conflict is this huge power asymmetry between the two sides. It's one thing that I think past peace processes have really failed to address. And it is a key driver of conflict. Certainly, when one power basically has unchecked the ability to do as it pleases, more or less, and trying to negotiate between them without addressing that power asymmetry. And as Limor said, in a confederation, Israeli Jews in particular are going to have to give up some of their privilege. And I would argue that in any scenario, 2 states, 1 state, confederation, that the dominant group of Israeli Jews has to give up some power and privilege. There's just simply no way around that, just the political mathematics. It's just the reality. So how does, to Ameer, how does confederation deal with that power imbalance given the realities? You have equal in concept, but you don't have 2 equal economies. You certainly don't have military equality. You don't have political, equality in a political sense. So what does it look like on the ground to have coordination? Are we talking about a joint Israeli-Palestinian armed force? What happens to the nuclear stockpile that Israel has? Is it shared? Does one side have a veto over the security actions at a local level of the other, particularly in places that there is much more intertwining of the 2 spaces, like Jerusalem? What does economic union mean? Are we talking about just the traditional kind of customs union, or are we talking about something more integrated? Could you break it down for us? What does it mean in practice, particularly on things like security and the economy?
I know that one of the most prevalent question that we get is on security. And I always remind people that under terms of, let's say, hatred and occupation, there is security cooperation between the 2 sides. Every security body in Israel will tell you that the PLO have been a partner in what concerns security, and this is under terms of domination, not under terms of peace. When we imagine a future of peace, we shouldn't imagine it from the current situation. We have to imagine it as a transformative imagination to a peace. And I think we are well aware of the asymmetry of power, and we believe that a union, confederated co-nationalism would be the best recipe for dealing with that, not putting Palestinians, after years of dispossessing Palestinians and weakening the political progress, political development, putting them behind the wall and saying they are not our business, will not be the optimal option for Israel. No, dealing with this, dealing and healing this asymmetry in economic level and political level is in Israel's interest, not the other way. A weak Palestinian state, which is not viable, which there's a chance that it will become a failed state. It's not in the interest of Israel. In the interest of Israel is a prospering Palestinian state, and we think that by union, by sharing, by a close cooperation and partnership, it is the best way to get there. Again, and these 2 people are already so intimately intertwined and entangled in each other economically, in what concerns security and institution, that the building blocks are already there. You just have to democratize it. There's already 2,000 Palestinian workers that go into Israel every day. there's already shared economy. You have to democratize and guarantee equality for all. And equality for all is in the interest of Israel. In the two-state solution, Israel will get it will get security based on might makes right. In the deal that will offer Israeli Jews, they will get security based on right makes might. They will be welcomed in the most deep way by the indigenous Palestinians, not as victorious, not as the stronger side, but sons and daughters of the homeland. That they have to know that when they picked their homeland here in the Middle East, they have to know that they have to share it with the indigenous people of this homeland, and there is no other way other than sharing or domination and apartheid. And this is not a theory. We have already 100 years of experience to learn from. And we saw that any other way led us, as we saw in the last vision of Trump's administration, to apartheid. This is what Israeli chose because they think they can. I will finish just with this sentence. We're not naive. We know that the current deadlock, the deep political deadlock, stems mainly from asymmetry of power, from moral decay that is the current situation of, I think, a majority of the Israeli Jews. However, there is a significant group among the Israeli Jews that if they will be introduced to a new political recipe, a new political imagination, a new political way out of the deadlock, and a group that does not suffer from moral decay, they will choose it. And with Arab Palestinians that quite naturally, I think, will opt for this solution, they can make a significant political power. We can, and we're not thinking, we're not trying to convince all. We have to convince enough people to make enough powerful political group to mobilize this vision and to materialize this vision.
If I could just kind of press you a little bit on that point, clearly, you know, when we're talking about, you're absolutely right. There's already cooperation. There's already this intertwined reality on the ground in almost all spheres of life, but it's based on domination. Moving toward a union that is based on equality, what incentive is there? Or, I mean, how do we know that, let's say, even a theoretical union is agreed upon, and then the day after, when we're supposed to begin implementing this new reality, you still have, how do you move away from the de facto Israeli dominance in all of those spheres, that Israel will continue to dominate the Palestinian economy, Israel will will dominate certainly militarily. What incentive does do you envision a combined armed force for Israel Palestine, or do they have their own separate armed forces? And does one have a veto over the other? I mean, how do you prevent de facto domination the day after, just given the enormous asymmetry?
You know, a problem stemming from power asymmetry. We're familiar with this kind of problems in the European Union, for example. I think every state, every department in this building that we're envisioning will have its own its full sovereignty, and it can enact its own laws to protect its own economy. So it's not you can regulate under the sovereignty, the sovereignty guaranteed for both states, for the weak, for future Palestine, for young future state of Palestine. Its sovereignty will enable it to enact the laws that will prevent domination. However, you're right in fearing this kind of problem. However, I prefer a future whereby the predicament is how to prevent the economic domination from the current present of apartheid. Let it be the problem. Let it be the problem of the future Palestinian parliament. How we can stop domination or asymmetry in economy, and we will deal with that. I prefer it from the current present of occupation, disposition, from a de facto apartheid and creeping apartheid. If this is a problem, this is a problem that two nations that are really with good intent, that are after 100 years are willing to share, and they understand that this is in their best interest. I think it's a matter of that can be solved, and you know what? I wish that these days will come soon enough.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm cognizant of our time. We have about 17 minutes left, and we have quite a few questions from our audience. And so a lot of the questions have to do with specific issues. How does Confederation deal with the settlements? Will the settlers still remain? And then the sort of, ancillary questions of, well, what about Palestinian property rights that were violated in the course of building those settlements? And so on and so forth. So there are questions about how does Confederation deal with refugees? What is the status of Jerusalem? I want to ask you both, maybe as succinctly as you can, to touch on how Confederation looks at the issue of settlements, Jerusalem, refugees. One by one, you can take turns, or however you want to do it. But just to spell out for our audience what it means in practice, specifically on those three issues. So let's start with Limor on Jerusalem.
Okay.
What is the status of Jerusalem?
Yeah. So Jerusalem is a focal point of the problem of separation. So what we are envisioning in our model is that Jerusalem is a united city, a joint capital of both states. So it has a separate, it functions as a separate entity, resembling, for example, Brussels in Belgium. So it has its own, in a way, identity that is a part of the two states, but also a united city that will be functioning as a co-national city. The details are not there yet, but this is the vision in general. That Jerusalem.
So it's similar to the open city model that was being proposed at various times since Camp David.
Yeah, yeah.
And Ameer, what about the settlers? What is the solution for settlers? Do they all get to stay where they are, and do they become citizens of a Palestinian state or residents, resident aliens? And what about Palestinian rights that were violated in the building of those settlements?
So regarding the settlements, what we, in our Confederation model, settlements are not remaining, but Israelis, as Palestinians, have freedom of movement and freedom of residency within the entire land. We are growing it gradually, not to jeopardize the political stability of each of the states. But the idea is that Israelis and Palestinians can live in the whole land. It means one of the purposes is that Israelis that are now living in settlements can stay where they are, but under the status of residents of the Palestinian state, respecting the laws of the land, respecting the laws of Palestine, and they remain also as Israeli citizens. So they will be able to apply to Palestinian citizenship if they wish to, and if Palestine will decide to grant them. But in a way, the way that we solve the problem of inequality and domination and exploitation of the settlement is by creating them as equal to the rest of the population in that area. With regard to property rights, and this is both to the settlements and to issues that are in Israel as well. Usually in the last decades, we got to think that the conflict is only since '67, but the conflict is much older, as Ameer said repeatedly, and the major phase of the conflict was '48, and in our movement we address it, and we're not ignoring it, and this is something that needs to be acknowledged and also to be addressed. The principle that we set is that we're not correcting an old or a new Amir?
Wrongdoing or
we're not correcting a wrong with a new one, but the aim is to address property rights with the settlement and also within Israel.
Do you envision some sort of truth and reconciliation mechanism being part of that process?
We haven't developed that, but this is something that could be useful. Yeah.
But presumably, at a minimum, if we're talking about freedom of movement and freedom of residence, at a minimum, Palestinians would be able to live in these former Jewish-only settlements, right? So any Palestinian would be able to buy a home or rent a home, and it could become mixed neighborhoods. And some of the settlements in Jerusalem have now become mixed neighborhoods in a way, like Pisgat Ze'ev.
Yes, there are questions with regard to how communities, especially small communities, will be able to maintain their way of life and traditions. But of course, the land will, and I think here again, thinking about Palestine and Israel together, and not, and we need to have, in a way, also reciprocity. We have things to compare, to learn from each other. Within our model, we have a Supreme Court of the Confederation that issues of rights of the minorities, for example, will be able to brought to it. So I'm imagining that there are so many issues, concrete issues that can be and should be addressed, but I think what we need to be focused now is on the big picture and on a big shift of mind that is needed in order to go on this path, which I think is a much better one, not only because of the prospects, but because how it sets our minds and hearts towards peace. It means that recognizing the interdependency between us. It means that we don't think only about ourselves, but that our future is based on the future of the other. And I think this makes us much more in a better position.
Yeah, I think it does make it more durable over the long term, any kind of proposed peace that is based on a genuine reconciliation and not simply, I think part of the problem with how US policymakers especially think about two states is, how do we negotiate this divorce so that each side could...
As a border conflict.
As it's a border conflict, you have X number of soldiers on the border, and this will be the arrangement.
It's not a border conflict.
And this is where the line is, when the reality is much more complicated. So addressing that psychological element, which and the political part of it also, one of the critiques against the one-state solution is that, everybody supports one person, one vote in principle. and we're seeing among Palestinians in the occupied territories a growing numbers, especially among the youth, who are abandoning the idea of their parents and grandparents, for a West Bank Gaza state. But one of the critiques is that, well, even among Palestinians, you don't have a political constituency. You don't have a political party that is championing the cause of one state. And certainly the Confederation model, I think, is even more at a disadvantage because it involves a number of psychological steps that you need to go through to arrive there. So what is this, is there a political constituency in Israel and among Palestinians for this idea? Is there a political party? Is that what you envision a country, a land for all becoming, is something like a political party that operates in both Palestinian and Israeli spheres? Or, because at the end of the day, what matters isn't even public opinion, but the political consensus. What is the political temperature and what can it bear? So Ameer, can you tell us what you all are doing to achieve that, kind of building the groundwork for a political movement on the ground?
First of all, we of course hope that this vision will be translated to political power. We're not. It's not only an intellectual exercise; it's a political vision, and I think that it would be fair to say that our effort is mainly divided into two fields. One is built in grassroots level, talking to people. We talk, I think, to hundreds, if not thousands, of people, convincing them. And then in the other section is diplomacy, is meeting with politicians, with opinion makers, with influential people, with as we done in the EU. I think we met with tens of politicians in either to speak to them, to convince them. So, and I think most importantly is to propose this political grammar, political toolbox for people like Beinart, for people, for other journalists, other opinion makers. And the chain of influence is very difficult. You can't really trace the causality chains of opinion, of change, but you have to provide them, and you have to expose yourself to more. We try to expose ourselves to more and more people in the grassroots level and the decision maker level and the influential level of opinion entrepreneurs. And gladly, as Limor mentioned earlier, we're now seeing significant fruits of this effort.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, and before we close, I want to give you both an opportunity. First of all, with apologies to all those who submitted questions and we weren't able to get them, but we have very limited time. There is one question I wanted to put to you, sort of generally, both of you, and then ask you to make any kind of concluding summary statements that you want to make before we close. What did you make of the Peter Beinart piece that generated so much controversy? Why do you think it was so controversial especially when Palestinians, going back to Edward Said in 1999, have been arguing for the same thing for many years? So what is that about, and how does that fit in? Does that help or hurt your initiative? For either of you or both of you, and then to include in that any wrapping up statements you have.
Ameer, would you like to go?
I've really liked Beinert's piece. I'm well aware of the difficulties in this piece, mainly the forsaking of element of statehood. But all in all, I think this invigorated this speech and this debate, and Beinart mentioning also Confederation as a way out of the deadlock and as a way, as a political vehicle to achieve equality, has put forward a lot of pieces that wrote and made Confederation a more familiar to more audience. So in all, I think it was a positive thing for us.
Great, Limor.
Yeah, I think that pieces that Peter Beinart wrote were excellent, and I understand that they caused a lot of controversy because he was pointing out to a one-state solution. Although later on he mentioned us as one of the options, and I think for us, I think it did only good because it raised suddenly we can break up from the traditional classic two-state solution and open our eyes to the problems that it has and to the alternatives. And at the moment, Confederation suddenly becomes something that we should consider seriously, much more seriously than it was handled before by Americans, by American Jews. And I hope that this will lead also to Israel as well. I think the annexation, the fear from the annexation also brought a new interest also in Israel to the issue that was very much neglected during the whole last years. I just want to finish with one thing. What we see until now, there is many years now of action and activity in Israel towards equality between Jews and Palestinians within Israel. There are a lot of NGOs and a great work has been done. The thing is that until now, and I think this is how Peter Beinart's article, I think, really gets to the point. We must shift our thinking of equality. It's not only until the green line we need to think about it, but we need to think about it within the entire land. And with or without thinking about Confederation, for me, and I think for many Jews, a Confederation holds the space to think about equality without making us afraid that our national self-determination will disappear, will be abolished. So for me, my main direction to practice is to practice equality. And this is something that we can work on and we can think how to do that. And I see some of the questions are this: how can we do that? This is exactly the questions that we need to start asking ourselves. And I think this is the trigger that we all need to be engaging. So after we were enrolled in the idea of equality within the entire land, now we can start work on that. And this is a great work to do.
Yeah, it is, and thank you both, and thank you to all our audience for tuning in. This is, I think, one of the most important aspects about this particular moment, even though it's not especially uplifting or optimistic, is that we're finally having these conversations and debating these issues. And so there are lots of things that still need to be answered. But it's very important that we continue to have the debate and the conversation about moving forward and reimagining a different kind of future than the one that we've been locked into for the past 25 years and that hasn't, or longer, and that hasn't really worked. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm going to once again thank my panelists and our audience, and hand it over to Lenny for some final words.
Thank you, Khaled. And thanks, of course, to you, Limor, and you, Ameer. This was indeed a very important session. And thanks to everyone for joining us for this conversation with Israel and Palestine. Thanks also to the staff of Partners for Progressive Israel for their work in making this discussion happen. We hope you've enjoyed this webinar. We're glad to bring it to all of you without cost. If you do indeed like it and want to learn more about our upcoming Israel Symposium or other programming, please visit our website at progressiveisrael.org. And while you're there, please consider making a contribution. That's what enables us to bring programs like this to you at no cost. Thanks to everyone and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Ameer and Limor and Lenny.
Thank you.
For having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.